And it's the grace of God to say, hey, listen, I made you, I love you, I'm with you, I'm for you, and I release you to be you. I release you to love me if you choose to, and I release you to betray me if you choose to. What grace. Boy, we're control freaks, so that doesn't feel like grace. That feels negligent or something. Feels like you don't have enough pride or boundaries or dignity for yourself. But the Father's grace is lavished, and this is our hope, the Father's grace lavished upon us. Here's the three things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the prodigal father, and we're going to talk about two kinds of people, and then we're going to talk about the exclamation point to this entire story. So let's talk about the prodigal father. You have this father who demonstrates grace in lots of ways that you might not consider to be called grace. The grace, first of all, to divide his possessions for his younger son. Now, to get your arms around this, you have to recognize that the ancient world, this world, was an honor-shame culture. And what that means is that the family name is more important than your name. And that the good of the family, the reputation of the family is more important than what you desire or have. In fact, that would be true even of the community, for the village, for the community. People live for the good of the community, not for the good of themselves. And so that's an honor-shame culture. And so what he's doing here is, in fact, when Jesus tells this story, and he starts off with this phrase, you would probably hear a gasp in the crowd. What? The younger son, Father, give me my share of the inheritance. And so the grace of the Father to do this. Now, it's also an agrarian culture. By the way, America, the West, we're not honor shame. We elevate the individual. And, my happiness is more important than the obligation I have to the community. So divorce rates in honor shame cultures are tiny low because it would be shameful to end your marriage and bring shame to the two families involved and to impact the cultural impact. So, you fight through and you stick it through because you owe it to the community. That's different than how we view things here. And so this young man says to his dad, hey, give me my share of the inheritance. Now his share would be a third. The older boy gets 2/3 and the second son gets a third. So it's also an agrarian culture. So how does the dad liquidate a third? He has to sell animals and he has to sell land because what he would give to his son would be animals and land. Instead, he has to liquidate those. And so he does. By his grace, apparently with no pushback or argument, he goes ahead and he sells a third of his possessions and gives this to his younger son. This is essentially the son saying, hey, I really don't want to wait till you're dead, so could you go ahead and cash out my share and give it to me now? The father does it, the grace to do that. The grace to let him go, to let him walk away. That's grace. We yearn to control. Boy, parent of 5 kids, we yearn to control them and we yearn to protect them, but it's grace of God that lets them go so that they can make their own choices. This is a gracious thing God does, and he lets the younger son go. It's the grace of the father that keeps an eye on the hill. We're not told how long he was gone, but long enough to actually burn through every bit of cash he got from his father. And to then find himself working on a farm, tending pigs, which for a Jew is an extra, thing for him to be tending to the feeding of pigs. And so there's some time elapsed here, but the dad just keeps looking at the hill. He went that way, longing for him to come home. And it's the grace that sees his son a great distance off and then runs. Another thing that culturally would not be done. The father girds his loins. You might have heard that phrase if you read the King James. They wear, robe type stuff to pull that up, tuck it in his belt like it's pants, and run. This was behavior of children, not of dignified fathers. And not only is he going to undignify himself and run, he's running for the one who wished he was dead and cashed out on his assets. And now the father's wealth creation capacity is limited because a third of his capacity to keep creating wealth has been given to his son who has squandered. But he runs to him runs to him. The grace of the Father. The grace to not only run to him, but to embrace him and kiss him and to reinstitute him as a son. Bring the best robe. This is a family garment. Put a ring on his finger. That's like handing him the family credit card again. Because rings were signet rings, and if you went into town to purchase things, you could stamp that ring in wax, and it would be basically a credit situation where you are now, the owner of that ring is responsible for the debt. He could go out now, he's entrusting his son, reclaiming, I'm a part of this family. Put shoes on his feet. What grace of the Father. The Father's grace to go out to the elder son who's hurt and offended and angry at his brother, and to go out and plead with him to come join the party. And then the grace to let both sons decide what they're going to do. This story ends with us not knowing. What does the elder son decide? Jesus leaves us hanging. What does he end up deciding? Does he join the party? Does he stay outside? How does he ongoingly relate to his dad? How does he ongoingly relate to his brother? Jesus leaves it hanging. And it's the grace of God to say, hey, listen, I made you. I love you. I'm with you. I'm for you. And I release you to be you. I release you to love me if you choose to, and I release you to betray me if you choose to. What grace. Boy, we're control freaks, so that doesn't feel like grace. That feels negligent or something. Feels like you don't have enough pride or boundaries or dignity for yourself. But the Father's grace is lavished, and this is our hope, the Father's grace lavished upon us. Well, let's talk about two kinds of people, because really what Jesus is showing, he's speaking, and I want to remind you the first verse that introduced this, the reason he tells this story is because tax collectors and sinners were gathering around him to hear him. And the Pharisees and teachers of the law, the elder brothers, are ticked off about this, that he is kind to them. It would be holy to not break bread with sinners. That's what holy people do. They separate themselves from sinful people. But not Jesus. Jesus breaks bread with them. The whole point of this story is to communicate the heart of God that says, I don't care how bad you've blown your life. I'm for you. And it turns out this parable really reveals there's two kinds of people, and I would call them irreligious and religious. Irreligious people would say there is no supreme authority, there is no gods, and I am the supreme authority of my life. So irreligious people would say, I'm not obligated to the universe. I'm not obligated to spiritual powers. I'm not obligated to some creator. I'm not obligated to the gods or to a God. I'm irreligious. I'm obligated to me. Religious people would say, no. The world has order to it, and there is a created order, and there's a creator. And maybe we don't understand who he is. In fact, Romans 1 says that creation itself declares the glory of God. And by just looking at creation, by looking at the complicated nature of a human body, by looking at just staring at creation, you realize it's the old ontological argument for God. If an ancient person found a wristwatch on the beach and they looked at it and took it apart, they would assume there's a watchmaker. And so the religious mindset is, no, there's a creator. This came from somewhere, and therefore I have some obligation to where this came from. And so there's right and wrong, there's moral, there's spiritual, there's good people and bad people, and good people live in submission to whatever God is like. So that's what I would broadly call irreligious and religious, and all of us fit in one of those two categories. Another way to look at that is that there's two ways of life. The way of life is, I do what's right for me, versus the other way of life, I do what's right. I'll do my own thing versus, no, I'll do the right thing. And all of us fall in those two camps, and probably we vacillate sometimes between those two camps. But some people say, I'm going to do what is right for me. I'm going to do my own thing, and I'm going to do it my way. Last week when Chuck talked to us about where's your brother, it's Cain and Abel. And Cain offers a sacrifice to God that is not the right one. But he says, I'm going to worship God the way I want to worship God. And Abel brings the sacrifice required. So he says, I'm going to do this the right way. Lots of people in our inherent personalities feel like we're supposed to do the right thing. And a lot of us in our inherent personalities think, I'm in charge. You know, that I've studied personality types, and they say that rebel personalities, even if they make a rule for themselves, they're compelled to break it. Like it's just in them. And so here's what the parable is designed to tell us. Both are wrong. The religious and the irreligious are both wrong. When you look at the younger brother, he is wrong to dishonor his father and to cash out. He is wrong to decide, I'm going to go squander this money and have a great time. He is wrong. Even his repentance is wrong. When he comes to his senses, he doesn't say, how could I have done this to my father? He doesn't say, how could I have done this to my community or to my family? What he says is, my dad's hired hands have plenty of food. He's not repenting, he's survival strategizing. And so he says, here's what I'll do. I'll go home and tell my dad, Father, I've sinned against you, and I don't deserve to be your son anymore. That's not what he feels at the emotional level. That's a sales pitch. So Dad, I know you won't take me back as your son, but hire me. Could I be one of your hired hands? Because those guys make a good wage. They have a livable situation. He's purely working the dad to survive. He is not repentant. And this is what we do when we are this personality, when we are this, hey, I'm going to do things my way. We're working it. I used to have a friend, he would always say, I can make that work. He said it hundreds of times. And he just had this impulse. Whatever situation he's in, he could figure out a way to make that work. That's that, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm on my own. It's up to me, and I'm going to make it work. And so he's not repentant to the Father. But the Father doesn't ask him to explain himself. The Father doesn't ask him to legitimize his return home. He just embraces him. In fact, the son can't even finish his speech because Dad interrupts it to say, welcome home, son. This is the heart of the Father. Well, then you got the elder brother who just can't take this. Now you would say, well, the elder brother was the faithful one. He was obedient to his father. He worked hard for his father. He worked hard for the family. He contributed to the family income. He's waiting his turn. He's doing this right. But his heart is betrayed when he says to his father, all these years I've slaved for you. Slaved for your father? Oh, you weren't doing this because we're family. You weren't doing this because you're my son. You weren't doing this because we are one. You're doing this because it's going to pay off for you at the end. Both sons are seeking self-actualization. Both sons are manipulating dad to get what they want. Here's the gospel of Jesus. Everybody's wrong. Everybody's loved. And everybody needs to embrace that and receive the Father's love, which you do not deserve. So you have this younger son who's on his knees, and while he did not return repentant, how could his heart not break to watch his father lavish kindness and love and restoration upon him when he thought he was coming looking for a job? And that's why I love that painting. He's down, his head is down. I think he's blown away at the grace and love of the Father. The elder son, though, that's a different story, because he stays outside the party. This is the question that strikes me. Can someone who offers no grace to anyone else embrace receiving grace for themselves? He can't enter the party. I can't tell you how many religious people I've known who are trying to live for God. They're trying to do the right thing. I'm not out there doing my own thing. Do I have lust? Sure I do, but I manage it because I'm going to do the right thing. Am I wanting things I don't deserve? Yeah, but I'm going to do the right thing. Do I want to steal something? Yeah, I'm tempted, but I want to do the right thing. Why? I'm doing the right thing. because it pays. All of us are control freaks. We exercise the level of control we think we need to make our life work. And moral people, I have met so many religious people who have no joy. The elder son cannot bring himself to party with everybody else. He can't bring himself to enter into his father's joy. In fact, he doesn't even own his brother. He says, this son of yours runs off and squanders, really what the son is thinking, our wealth. But the father says to him, this brother of yours has returned. The biggest obstacle, the reason this parable is told, back to Luke 15:1, is because there are people watching tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes be embraced by Jesus. And they're going, what gives? They don't obey the law, they don't do the right thing, and yet here you are loving them? This makes no sense to us. This isn't right. And it's hard to enter a party if you don't understand the Father's grace. And the obstacle between lost sons and their father is older brothers. The elder brother attitude. I believe the point of the story is to reveal the heart of the Father who chases lost things no matter how they got lost or why they're lost or what their motives were when they got lost. He wants them back. He loves them. And he's telling this story directly to a crowd of elder brothers who don't want prostitutes and tax collectors and sinners to be forgiven by the Father. They want those people judged. They want those people to get what they deserve. They want justice. And Jesus is teaching us, you're all wrong. This is where I learned that every impulse of the human heart to understand God is wrong. Because we think, well, I'm going to serve God. We all know this. Like if you're serving God faithfully, you expect your life to be blessed. And when it's not, that's very confusing to you. I had a room of high school students years ago in Deer Lodge, Montana. And I asked these high school students, there were 12 of them in the room. And I said, hey, is it possible that you are in the pocket with God? Like you are living for God, you're faithful to God, you are walking tightly with God, and your life is a train wreck at the same time. Is that possible? And they all said, no way. In my reading this week, John chapter 9, I believe it is, a man is born blind, and they meet him as an adult. And the disciples asked Jesus, was this man born blind because of his own sin or because of the sins of his father? There has to be an explanation for this, because if you do the right thing, good things happen to you. And this is what we keep trying to work the system with God. And God says, listen, you're all wrong, because I'm not wanting to be manipulated, and I don't want you to serve me for what you can get. You know what I want? Is I want you to know that you're loved. And this is the exclamation point to the entire story. Your Father knows that you're wrong, and he wants you back, and he loves you. And this is what we are to bring to the world. May God help us not climb into the elder brother chair and be frustrated when people who are a mess are loved by the Father. In fact, we should help them find their way to the Father. We should be paving the road back to the house rather than saying, what are you doing here, right? And this is why so many people in our culture love the idea of Jesus, but they don't like the idea of church, because they feel an elder brother scowl looking at them when they come into a church. And instead, we should be, oh, here it is. Here's the exclamation point. Jesus. Who is the elder brother? Jesus. He's the firstborn among many brothers. He's the first risen from the dead. He is the firstborn. Our elder brother, Jesus, what does he do for us? What does he do for the ones who are wrong, who are lost, who have squandered, who've disregarded Father, who've lived for ourselves, who manipulate God, who try to work God? What does our elder brother Jesus do for us? He climbs on a cross and gives his life so that the younger brother can come home. That's what elder brothers do. That is our call. You're going to hear a lot in the next several months about an idea for us as the people of God in a fallen culture, the idea of position and posture. When Jesus is brought, they bring to him a woman caught in adultery, and they ask him, they said, hey, the law says that she should be stoned to death for her adultery. We caught her in the very act. Now, they didn't bother bringing the dude with them, and the law applies to him too. So they're all kinds of messed up. But Jesus does two things right there. This is in John 8, I think. He tells her at the end of the conversation, go and sin no more. Jesus' position on adultery is it's a terrible idea. It violates God's heart. It ruins relationships. It's destructive. Jesus would say, I think adultery is a horrible idea. I'm against adultery. That's his position. What's his posture? To protect her from those who want to stone her and to say to her, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more.